presented by Dr. Lauren Kaiser and Crystal and Hannah and Bailey and Katie, or Kate, oh my goodness. Yes, Katie, sorry.
Vegan.
Yeah,
they were the other one. I had Rachel Lego.
Oops. If you're not on mute, just remember to hit mute. You don't always join automatically on mute, so just be careful about that. I'll be here to help support with technology needs throughout. If you have any tech questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Again, please remember to keep your microphone on mute and keep an eye on the chat. I believe our presenters may be sharing some resources, and we look forward to our presentation. We'll be here together today until 2:30, so we look forward to the chat.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I was just giving a quick view of the chat here just to make sure, or the gallery view to make sure everyone was on mute, because I know how embarrassing that can be if you didn't realize you were on mute. But hello and welcome to part one in our two-part series on instructional consultation. We submitted this, well, first of all, I'm Lauren Kaiser from Millersville University. We're going to get into much more of a deeper introduction in a minute. And I'm here with my co-presenters, either former students or current students from Millersville. And we will all introduce ourselves in just a moment. But, we wanted to first talk about the title. When we submitted the proposal back in, I think we were working on this maybe in, I don't know, late spring, beginning of this summer. We were, just beginning to start out into this pandemic, both the health pandemic and the racial pandemic. And so we knew teachers' jobs are always very stressful. But this was an unusual level of stress and anxiety, unmanageable. But when we wrote this session and title, we knew these were unprecedented times, but we didn't quite realize that this would become a big meme or a joke that people would often kind of laugh about. And so, we have a hysterical collection of internet memes about unprecedented times. So yes, I did say that. And my teenage daughter would say, "Mom, that's cringy," to use that term. But the fact remains, these are very challenging times. Getting a little bit of feedback here. Just make sure everybody's on mute. And so, I was in an earlier session today. It was an excellent session on equity and trauma by Dr. Nicole Holland-Sims and Dana Malakovics. And they talked about, they had participants put in the way they were feeling today, and it created a word cloud. And I don't have their word cloud here to share, but these were the top 3 feelings of the day, just from our own participants. And we're not even talking about, classroom teachers, who I really think of as our frontline workers, but it's stress, anxiety, exhaustion were the top 3, and there were many others. And so we know that, in order to get through this time, it is important to have humor and to laugh at some of the memes and the things that are going to get us through. But we really, truly do need strong systems of coping and support. And so, today we're going to introduce ourselves before we get into this road of how do we support teachers through these times, and really through any times we're going to be talking about. And so I'm Lauren Kaiser, and as I said earlier, I'm a faculty member at Millersville University. I'm really excited to be presenting this series today, not by myself, but with some past and current consultation students. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves briefly. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Crystal Rousseau-McGettigan. I'm a former student of Dr. Kaiser's from Millersville. I graduated last year, and this year is my first year working. I'm at the Lancaster School District in New Holland, PA, and I am a school psychologist for the 7th through 12th grade and also for the emotional support population.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Lombardo. I am a school psychologist intern at Eastern Lancaster County School District as well. So I get to work with Kristlyn, which is really fun. I'm district-wide, so 3 different elementary schools, our middle school and our high school. I'm having a great time, and I'm really excited to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bailey Gibson. I am also a Millersville student. I'm in my 3rd year doing my internship. and I am down in Maryland currently at the Harford County Public Schools.
And my name is Katie Fritz. I am a former student of Dr. Kaiser. I graduated in May, and I'm currently working at the Pequea Valley School District in Lancaster County.
Thanks, Katie. So I am really privileged today to be able to co-present with this wonderful group. And so we are really excited to share the good work of some of their cases and what they learn in our consultation class. But before we begin, we also want to recognize our own humility as consultants in this moment, right? Even putting this together, I really struggled with, how can I help teach other people how to support others when, we're all really going through this very stressful time and we don't know how to navigate these waters. I've certainly consulted with teachers for a long, long time, but I've never consulted with teachers in a pandemic while they're using PPEs or wearing masks or working remotely. And so this is all a new territory for us. And so we're learning as we go. And also in terms of the racial pandemic, right? We would be remiss if we didn't talk transparently about our own potential biases as white women and the importance for us as consultants to be introspective at all times about the privileges we hold, our own implicit biases that we might not even be aware of, but to be constantly vigilant, to be thinking about that and look for that in our work. And so we don't claim to have any easy answers or a magic wand, which most of you are like, wait, I'm out of here, right? I came for a magic wand. We don't have that, but we just know that in this time as school psychologists, this is our work. And we are here to be helpful and useful to teachers. And we need a process by which to do that. And we need skills to get through this difficult and complex time with humility and respect for the work that we're all trying to do in order to help improve positive outcomes and equitable outcomes for all. So how are we going to do that? This is our roadmap for today. We're going to be reviewing and discussing the background of instructional consultation specifically. So we're going to get into some of the evidence base as well as the theoretical basis of it, which it draws from several other models, process consultation, multicultural school consultation. So we're going to briefly touch on that as the foundation of our work. But then for the majority of the session, we will kind of overview all the 3 skills that a consultant would need in IC to do that work. But specifically, we're going to hone in on the communication in this session, recognizing that, this is the type of work we might spend a whole semester on. And even after a semester, we could use more time and training in this. So we're going to carve us out a little bit of time to talk about the collaborative and reflective communication skills, specifically how to approach consultation with humility, and then to think about our own identities as consultants, as well as the identity of the teacher that we might be working with, and the student that they are working with. And then to practice those reflective communication skills that will help us be more effective at conveying the empathy that we have for teachers, as well as trying to help them become more objective in their own work, which is likely highly emotional right now. And then at the end, this isn't necessarily a session on teleconsultation, but we will hopefully, if we have time, talk about, how can this be done remotely if we need to do it remotely. I'm just starting out with my own current class right now. They're all taking their cases via teleconsultation, and we're getting some good lessons learned, and we're seeing that it's pretty doable. And so we might be able to offer some of that information, time permitting. So let's get right into it. All right. So I did introduce myself, but I usually like to start with new groups talking a little bit more about my story. And I apologize to the students in the room who already have heard this a few times. But I do think it's relevant because I am a former teacher myself. I started off as an elementary school teacher. And so I like to talk about how I found my way into instructional consultation. So first, if any of you, I don't know how many of you have been a teacher before. If you have, you could always use one of the little symbols to show me like thumbs up, yep, other teacher here. But if you've been a teacher, then you're in the position of relating and knowing how hard that work is and often how isolating it can be. And if you haven't had that experience, oftentimes we might wonder, like, why do teachers do what they do, right? Or what was their training? Don't they know this already? And we can get really frustrated with them. But knowing, teachers often have a very short amount of time in their undergrad degree, where, you have all your gen ed electives that you have to take and, a few methods courses. And then you're thrown out to the wolves, so to speak. And for me, that's what it was like. I came from the university where I had wonderful, collaborative, supportive, cooperating teachers and supervisors. And then your first year, you're totally alone. And so, then I had this experience of being on a team, my second grade team.
Live, you mean? Yeah.
Oh, gotta put somebody on mute. Make sure to check your mute, everybody. So nervous, have an embarrassing moment for somebody. All right, so yes, but in my first year, I was on a team, wonderful people. I really enjoyed all of them socially, interpersonally, we got along. However, each person on the team was such a unique teacher in terms of their philosophical style of teaching. One was as constructivist as they come. She was really into discovery, learning, and building off of what the kids did that day in class. She never really had a lesson plan. The other was as traditional as they come and always had a very rigid lesson plan, including often like copying things directly out of the book or doing rote handwriting practice. Both had merit. Me, I was somewhere in between as a teacher, and I didn't really know who to go to for collaborative support for instructional planning. And, I would say, well, maybe I'll ask someone from the district level for help. And they would say, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. They're going to think you don't know what you're doing. And that'll kind of flag you as a bad teacher. And, I thought, oh, my goodness, really? I didn't believe in that. I kind of believed in a collaborative model, but I was scared. But the truth was, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was a new teacher. Also relevant was that I was a new teacher in a diverse school. And I was a white, middle-class female teacher, who had a very suburban upbringing myself, but I was in a racially diverse Title I school. And, I didn't have that much awareness about me at the time to really understand the systemic influences at play, but I did know I was struggling as a teacher to meet all the needs of my students. And so luckily though, I worked in a school that had an instructional consultation team. And so they had a team of people that were already trained in IC. And so I knew enough to reach out to that team and to ask for help. But, who did I reach out to for help? Majority of my students that I requested assistance for were my Black and brown students. Looking back on that now, I can see I just wasn't well prepared for how to teach them. I wasn't aware of my own biases. The good news, though, was that I knew it couldn't be them. I knew it was me as a teacher. I just needed help and support. And luckily, there was a process in my school that had that. And so I was also really lucky that my school psychologist was trained in IC. And so she was the one that was assigned to me as a consultant. And then we worked through the IC process with a student or two. I actually also had another IC case manager who was a school counselor, and we worked through the process for a student or two. And it was through that I had this opportunity to reflect on my own instruction. And they never really totally gave me advice or unsolicited opinions, but every time they asked questions, I stopped and I thought differently about what I was doing, not what the students were doing. And then I made adjustments. And it was through that I realized more teachers need this kind of a process. We would be more effective if we all kind of had this reflective opportunity. And if we can get more teachers to buy into it and participate in it, because not all of my team members did. And so that was something I saw as an issue. And so I decided to go to the University of Maryland to get my own training to become a school psychologist, and specifically to train with Dr. Sylvia Rosenfield, because I wanted to learn more and specialize in the instructional consultation aspect. And so, I don't claim to be an expert on culturally responsive pedagogy, but I do trust the process. And I hope that giving it away in this training, and then also in my work as a trainer, will help us all evolve on this journey. But enough about me, right? So why are you here? What's your role? What are your experiences? I just borrowed this from Dr. Karuder's session before. We're going to use the annotation feature. If you haven't used that before, in your Zoom up at the top, I think, or it might be on the bottom for some of you, but mine's at the top. If you go to view options, you should see annotate. And we're going to stamp it up. I didn't want to do a poll today. We thought polls could be good. So you're going to go to the stamp feature, and we're going to try this out now, because then you should be able to stamp what is your role. Are you a school psychologist? Are you a graduate student, a faculty member, or something else? Oh, good. You all are stampers. You know it. If anyone's having trouble, we can try to help you, or you could just write your answer in the chat if you're not sure. All right, we have got a lot of school psychs. This is awesome. I love it. And also, I'm just looking at my participants list. We got 66. I feel like this is unheard of for consultation. I'm very excited because usually in consultation is like the little room in the back at conferences, and maybe we got 4 people, you're preaching to the choir. But hopefully this is a shift for our field, and we're realizing, hey, we need to be here as a support to teachers and in that with students. Oh, someone did a big check mark. Great. We've got a lot of grad students, probably a lot of mine. Thank you all for coming and supporting me and your classmates. And then we got a couple of faculty. Awesome. And then one other. If you're other, maybe put it in the chat so we know what your role is. Lots of school psychs. Supervisor. All right. Awesome. Well, welcome. We're glad to have all of you. So now let's see. Oh no. Do I have to clear that? All right. Let me see. Or did you already? No, this is okay. Let me clear those because I got to learn my new tool here. How do I clear?
Do we each need to clear ours, Dr. K?
Oh yeah, clear. Maybe try that. Thank you. Because I'm not finding my annotation tools at the top. So yes, clear. Oh, good. Clear away. Awesome. Now we got it. So what is your experience with consultation in general? And so before you start stamping just yet, here's what I want to define. I want to say consultation is a different definition than maybe the layperson's definition. So the layperson's definition of consultation might be a hallway chat, you know, giving some ideas before and after the meeting to a teacher, maybe a brief, you know, run in with the teacher and giving them some ideas. Here, we're actually talking about something that's more sustained, using a systematic problem-solving process to collaboratively support a teacher, not a coaching model, not supervision, but actual, what we would call in the school psych world, consultation. All right, now you got it. All right, so, okay, this is exciting. And if you're putting other, just write it in the chat. Okay. All right, and this is about what I expected as it's shaping up here. So we have in the field, typically, a lot of folks are spending time in team-based consultation. And that is, in some team-based consultation could be systematic problem solving where you come back with the same team week after week, and you might be doing organizational or systems consultation to improve one particular aspect of the school. But we also have a lot of team-based consultation like an SST team or a child study team or an IEP or whatever the acronym might be, the alphabet soup. We have a lot of those teams, in which case we are working collaboratively at those teams and we are often giving good information, but it may not actually necessarily follow a problem-solving model. We'll talk about that a little bit in probably session 2 a little bit more clearly. But behavioral consultation, most of us in our field get trained in behavioral consultation. There was a good research study by Newman et al. In 2015 of what training early career psychologists report having in consultation, and most reported having behavioral consultation. Many fewer, maybe 13% said they have instructional consultation. And then, you know, of course, that is also significantly related to those that actually use it in practice. So it makes sense that we only have like 1 or 2 little stampers in that section. It also makes sense why you're here today to learn more about it, which is great. All right, clear those away and let's move to the next one. So what is your experience with IC? Now this obviously, if only a few of you stamped it up, or most of you might be kind of in the awareness phase, and that's okay, that's why you're here. But some of you maybe have had lots of training in it, but maybe you just may not have had all. I think we got it, someone that needs to be on mute again too. But yeah, go ahead and start stamping. This is fun. I like this. I never used this stamper before. I'm going to have to make this part of my practice. Okay. So lots people with brief awareness. A couple people have never heard about it. That's awesome. Well, I'll tell you a lot about it. Most of the session today is going to be, and the second part, if you're coming to both, didactic review of the process, but we had tried to pepper in some role play and practice because we figured we had some folks on this end of the spectrum too who have heard about it and have been trained in it, but maybe don't use it a lot and need a little refresher, and maybe even some conversation about like, how do we start using it again? Okay, so great. We're gonna try to move the needle from knowing about it to doing it. And that often is related to a lot of these training experiences, right? So if you've read about it and you've been talked to about it, like I'm going to do a little bit today, but you haven't had a chance to see it and practice it, that may also be why we're reluctant to do that. And that's why my work in a trainer is to really try to use the I do, we do, you do model, where we model it, we practice it, and then you go and do it with supervision. And if you're not getting that, then that can be something that, you know, can be done with additional field training. All right, go ahead and clear away, and then we're gonna move on. So now let's talk about how is it an evidence-based practice for supporting teachers to lower their stress and build their efficacy so that we can inform student outcomes. So one of the things that we know from a good amount of research is that when teachers are healthy and they're well, right, then they're going to have a positive morale. And they're going to not necessarily is that necessary and sufficient, but when they're doing well and they also have confidence, which would be, you know, defined as teacher efficacy, then those are the kind of winning combinations for student success. How do we know this? Well, we had some early work by Rosenholtz, where she went into schools that were learning impoverished and and other schools that were learning enriched. And what she noticed was the big difference between those schools was teacher collaboration connected to teacher learning enhanced efficacy. And then that's what in turn enhanced student outcomes and helped students beat the odds or some of their risk factors. We also know from more recent research by McLean, this opposite is true too. So when teachers are exhausted and when they're burned out, their efficacy gets shaken and students have difficulty. So specifically, McLean et al. In 2019 found that when combined, teacher burnout and self-efficacy variables accounted for 7 to 30% of the variance in universal screening scores. So do we ever think about that when we collect our universal screening data and we're looking at data and we say, oh, here's, you know, 30% of our kids are at risk. Do we actually look to see how many of them are coming from teachers' classrooms who might be exhausted or burned out? Usually not. But that 7 to 30% variance is the difference of some kids ending up in specialized programs and other kids not. And that's a teacher level variable. Also, Eddy et al., this was brand new in one of the school psych review 122nd digest. I don't know if you all get those, but they're really nice little YouTube blurbs about research. But they found that teachers experiencing greater emotional exhaustion had higher odds of their students receiving office disciplinary referrals and in-school suspensions. And their teachers with greater efficacy had lower odds of school suspensions. This finding was particularly striking for their Black students. When teachers were exhausted and they lacked efficacy, their odds of exclusionary discipline for their Black students was 3 times greater than for their white students. So, you know, to me, this research is really critical in indicating the need. If we want to support students and we want to support equity, we have to support teachers. However, most of our student interventions, or most of our interventions and resources are aimed at students. Our SEL interventions are often aimed at helping students develop coping strategies. I used to work on one for a long time where I worked with students who were at risk for anger and aggression problems, and I taught them coping strategies, but I would be sending them back into classrooms with teachers who were burned out and didn't know what to do instructionally, and they would come back the next week having trouble coping. If those resources were reallocated into a coaching or consultation model, we may have seen more gains. And so NASP is well aware of this, and this is why in our new NASP 2020 professional standards document, we have a rebranding of the NASP practice model. It's really a lot of the same dimensions. We still have some of these cute stars here. If you haven't cleared your star, you can, but I like it. It reminds me of, it's right there on consultation, right? But consultation is a permeating practice. And so what that means is it should be part of everything that we do. It's the way that we give psychology away, to use Gutkin and Connolly's term that's become so famous in our field. And we have to do so with a foundation for equity and ethical practice, for fairness and for justice. And we have to do so using research and evidence-based practice. So let's talk about that evidence-based consultation and stress reduction. I love this visual here. Thank you to Chrislyn. She's like our artist on the slides. But did you know that consultation is actually significantly more effective at reducing teacher stress than relaxation training? So a lot of us in this moment have been trying to rush to, breathing exercises, maybe as a staff, leading some of those mindfulness exercises, which aren't bad. Certainly I've been very thankful when people have made me stop and breathe. Earlier today in Dr. Holland Sims and Dr. Milankovic's session, I had to have a breathe moment, and it was very helpful, especially today. However, the research on it says that's not necessarily going to produce lasting change for teachers. And so this is kind of a dated study, but you can see it cited there on the slide. Tunnicliffe and colleagues in 1986 actually did an experimental design, which is very rare in consultation research. But they experimentally manipulated teachers and put some in a collaborative behavioral consultation group, and then the others were in a relaxation training group. And so some received consultation, the others received relaxation training. And the analysis of their stress levels before, during, and follow-up really showed significant effects for consultation, but not for the relaxation training. Well, why might that be? Well, relaxation gives you help in the moment, but it doesn't actually solve your work-related problem, right? So if you're stressed because your kids are not learning to the best of their ability, or because you've had, a really tough behavioral dynamic in your classroom this year, right? It's not going to go away. So consultation, being a problem-solving approach, may actually be that missing piece, because it actually might help solve the problem, which long-term will have a better coping outcome. So, all right, what about stress? So what does stress cause? One thing that we know is that when we are stressed, we tend to be less objective, right? We have more irrational thinking. Or the opposite could be true. The more irrational thinking we have, the more stressed we are. That's kind of a bi-directional nature that we don't know, the chicken or the egg. But certainly when there's stress, there's a lack of objectivity, overgeneralizations, catastrophizing. And so we also, as humans, have this fundamental attribution error. When something goes wrong, right, if it happens to us, we're quick to give ourselves some extra credit. Like, okay, it's got to be the situation, right? It's not me personally, but it's got to be something going on outside of me. But when it happens to somebody else, like for a teacher, their student, it has to be something, it can't possibly be me. It has to be a dispositional trait. So we're more likely to assume that if something's wrong with someone else, it's something wrong with them, not their situational factors. And so this kind of thing plays out all the time. And, going back to that concept of team collaboration, some really interesting studies by Steve Notek. If you don't know his work, he did some really excellent qualitative work with teams in the early 2000s. And he spent time, and I don't know how he even got permission from school districts to do this, but they allowed him to record and to qualitatively analyze the dialogue that happened at student study team meetings. And what he heard was some quotes that you see here. Like, so we've all heard it, though. You probably are familiar from your own team meetings, but here, he actually has documented it, that, people would say that child is a bad apple, just like their mom. They come from a backwards family. The one that was really interesting to us is, when that study came out, was the single wide versus the double wide would come up at the team meetings as being a factor that might actually help problem solving. Like, oh, okay, well, that kid's from a double wide. Oh, okay, or that one's from a single wide. They were talking about trailer parks. That particular school happened to be near a trailer park home area. And, the teachers kind of had a perception that the kids who came from the single wides had more problems than the kids from the double wide, because of course that's a socioeconomic, proxy variable. But, as if the time spent talking about that in a meeting is really going to help that child become a better reader, writer, behave better in the classroom. And so Notek also did some research with schools that were transforming and training into an instructional consultation team. And he found that some of these types of exaggerated and generalized kind of negative comments switched to more problem focus and solution, moving from problem admiration to problem solving. Also becoming more specific, more positive, and more achievable type goals. And then he also noticed that teachers' comfort and their decision-making started to improve as well. So other research on instructional consultation in particular found that, a large majority of teachers, once they actually get into it and it's implemented well, they're highly satisfied with it. They report 95% report being satisfied with it, report being confident, feeling that it helps them actually understand how to solve future problems. 81% of teachers surveyed through my own dissertation research going way back, but that 81% of teachers said, okay, I have a new skill or strategy that I'm going to apply in the future. 20%, which seems like a low number, but it's high when you think that this was information that they self-reported in an open-ended question. It wasn't a survey item, but 20% actually unsolicitedly said, I learned a new assessment strategy, which is interesting because we often think of consultation as trying to give a teacher a strategy, but sometimes teachers just need to know a way to find out what their kids know better. They need a better way to become more objective and assess their students more completely. 40% of teachers reported using the strategy they learned in consultation with other students, similar students. Experimental data from IC has also indicated increase in efficacy and teacher efficacy. What I found most interesting, this was a dissertation of Jess Kohler. She did a sub-analysis of an experimental design. IC was implemented. It was a big IES study where it was implemented in 34, well, the study was 34 schools. So it was implemented in 17 schools and then not implemented in 17 control schools. And the schools that had IC as a school model, overall, teachers in the building were more efficacious to a modest degree. And then where they were the most significantly efficacious was on some of those items that were in the survey that were more specific kinds of efficacy. Like I feel more confident I feel confident to solve problems for my EL students. I feel more confident to solve problems for my students who come from a different background from myself. And so it's moving the needle on some of the way teachers feel confident to help diverse students from themselves. And that was really interesting to me. Also, what you see here on the slide is in that same study, they found a high correlation with efficacy and specialists, so like school psychologists or reading specialists or special educators, report of increased collaboration. So the interpretation of that is if we are becoming more collaborative and becoming more involved with instructional decision-making and problem solving in a school, teachers are going to benefit from that. They're going to become more confident in what they're doing. All right, that's a lot. That's a mouthful, but I wanted to kind of give the basis of the evidence for the work. So now, what is IC? So several of you do have a brief awareness of this already, or half of you really have an extensive awareness. But I do know that a few of you had come because you have never heard of it before. So I do want to give enough of a review for those that are brand new to this. So instructional consultation is primarily the work of Dr. Sylvia Rosenfield. And I was lucky to be one of her mentees and advisees. And she wrote up the first model, the first application of the model, instructional consultation, when she was a new faculty member setting out to teach consultation. She believed heavily in the behavioral consultation model, but realized that the majority of her students, her grad students, were coming to her with academic concerns, academic cases. And knowing that the field also looks that way too, the highest number of referrals that we get as school psychologists are for reading concerns. So she wanted a model that would address academic problem solving as well as behavioral problem solving, and she called that instructional consultation. Since then, she's written a book of case studies. I get no cutbacks on these books. I just like to put them out there in case you're looking for resources for this. But this was a collection of case studies of some of her students in IC. And then this newest book by Newman and Rosenfield is kind of an update. It's kind of like an IC part 2, but they call it school consultation. The model is really still the same model. It's just kind of a shifting in language, because one of the things Sylvia had noticed over her career was that schools tend to, or school psychologists or people in the models tend to self-select what model they're going to use based on the problem. And this was found in the Newman et al. Study of early career school psychs too, that people will say, oh, I pick my model based on the concern I have. What's problematic about that is if we pick behavioral consultation because a problem appears behavioral, but we get into it and we find out that a lot of behavioral issues actually have an academic or instructional mismatch component, then we only have one half of the process. We only have one tool, if all we have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And so that could be a potential issue. So it's harder then to switch gears to instructional consultation. And so she wanted to have something that could be more of a meta model, which would be school consultation, which could include both instructional problem solving and behavioral problem solving. She borrowed heavily from the work of Dr. Ed Gickling and others who actually I heard referenced earlier in the session on math, assessment and intervention. I always love to hear that work being shared. And I know it's really well known in this state because Dr. Gickling got his start with a lot of the other leading researchers in the state, Ed Shapiro, Jim Tucker, and others. And so that work really started here. So many of you already know this quite well. We're going to talk about this more in part 2, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. And then this work was then developed as a team model. I kind of described that earlier when I talked about my own journey into this, where, you know, what was found was that school psychologists can't really carry the load to support all teachers in a building by themselves. There's not enough time in our day because we do have such a comprehensive role. However, if we could help work and train a team so that they all have IC skills, then we have capacity in the building to support more teachers and more students. And then we as school psychologists might be able to take more than one case because our time, you know, arguably, I know, don't pummel me with this. Good thing I'm on Zoom, right? I can't get hit with any tomatoes, but our time is a little more flexible than a classroom teacher's, just in terms of we can kind of guide our schedule in some way, whereas they have a very set schedule and they really only have their lunch break and their planning period to meet with other adults in the building. And so a classroom teacher could take one case, but we as school psychs or other related service providers in the building can take multiple cases and support more people. So this is written up in an Instructional Consultation Teams 1996 text, but a lot more of it is actually on the ICAT resources website. And that's where they've now developed this into a big training approach that, you know, schools, districts can partner with. I worked with them for many years in 7 different states and many schools to implement this model. And one of our principals says it's not doable, it's doneable. However, if it's not doneable in your school, right, your school doesn't have an IC team, this is going to be you thinking about how to do this work right now. And I will say that that's how it gets started. If we can do it really well with one person, and then we have great results, then we can share it. And then schools, other people in the school get interested and want to buy in and do more. So the goal of IC is to enhance and improve student and staff performance. It's not just a student outcome here. We're really trying to help the consultee, the teacher, develop their skills so they can help more students. It's a problem-solving process. And so you can see the steps here. Again, we still have our little stars from earlier. If that's you and you can delete or erase your star, go ahead. But in this session, we're not focused as much on the problem-solving process as we would be in part 2. So if you want to know more about the problem-solving process, come back to part 2. But it is a stage-based problem-solving process where in the beginning, we really are working to build a collaborative relationship with the teacher and to talk about what kind of work we'll be doing together. Through the problem-solving process, we analyze the concern by doing instructional assessments, behavioral assessments if it's a behavior concern, to try to understand the function of the case or the instructional match mismatch. We prioritize, we come up with a short-term baseline and short-term goals, develop an instructional strategy that's going to be done in the classroom, primarily by the classroom teacher, in order to make that match, and then to monitor progress, give support throughout and feedback, and then to close if the case is successful or to circle back if we get stuck. So today there's many assumptions and philosophy that underlie this model, but today we're going to focus on this one here, which is really this concept of community. Like right now, we're in these very stressful times, maybe even working in isolation. Like if you're in a school that's doing remote instruction or hybrid, or even some of you are doing face-to-face, but you're not allowed to actually have in-person meetings, you still have to get on Zoom to do your meeting with adults in the building, it might lose a sense of community. And so we want to still figure out how can we use consultation to provide that support and that community that we believe teachers are entitled to. And that's strong language, because if you think about it, like a doctor or a lawyer or someone in something that we see as a scientific profession, they have collaboration and consultation built in their schedule. That's assumed as part of their work, that their work is so hard and so complex that they have to consult. Well, the same is true for teachers, but we often don't honor that. So we believe this process puts that at the forefront. Another big concept here is the shift in thinking from broken child, internal deficit, to broken match. Having an ecological attribution of the problem, seeing this as a curriculum or instructional mismatch. And so we're going to talk mostly today about how, from a communication standpoint, we can help often shift that thinking. Teachers might come in very frustrated and stressed, and it might sound like they're blaming the student or their home life and deficit-based thinking. But it might be because they're stressed or they're exhausted and they just need time to reflect more clearly. And as they do, they can get that broken match into a better focus. And so that's going to be mostly what we're focusing on today. All right, I'm zooming. I want to give you time for practice though. Hope we're all doing okay here still. So the theoretical and conceptual underpinning. First, as you can hear, a lot of what I'm talking about is that this is a consultee-centered approach. So Sylvia Rosenfield drew upon the work of Gerald Kaplan, who was one of the first to create a consultation process that was focused on developing the consultee to help them solve their own work-related problem. And the theory was that usually a consultee, in Kaplan's model, these were usually like nurses or caretakers in a clinical type setting, but that they would have difficulty with having a lack of skill, a lack of objectivity, a lack of confidence, or a lack of knowledge. And so the same is true in teaching, right? So your teacher could come to you and be very frustrated. It could be because they're not objective about the problem, but it could also be because they don't have the skill, the instructional or curriculum skill, maybe the knowledge of evidence-based practice, or all of that, but they just need a little confidence to know, like, yeah, you should do that. And you should stick with it a little longer. It seems to be working. Let's look at that. So actually Gutkin did some research and found that often objectivity is actually the least likely of all of those concerns for a consultee, even though it might appear like that in the beginning. Something that looks like a lack of objectivity actually might be just masking itself as a lack of skill or knowledge or confidence. And that's where the empathy, I think, for us needs to come in, because it can be really easy to get frustrated with a teacher who's not doing something that we know is best practice, or who's really negative about a student or a family member. But if we can think about it like they're in a bad place, the teacher themselves has a mismatch, and we have to help think that through and how to give them more of a match so that they can get out of that place. So this comes then from the work of Edgar Schein. So Sylvia Rosenfield also is a big fan of his work with process consultation, which, where you can see this quote here, is really focused heavily on the relationship between the helper and the person. And Schein uses this term humble inquiry. Actually, there's a whole book, it's actually titled Humble Inquiry by Schein, where he talks about this concept of humility, kind of one downing yourself, being humbled, having this attitude of interest or inquiry. He talks about us having to move from a culture of doing and telling to listening and supporting. And so here you can see this, right? He says that in a lot of our work, and this is very true in education, we're kind of in the telling, selling, or expert model. You know what you should do? Research says, right? And we can kind of get into that idea where we quickly diagnose a situation and offer a solution. That's not too effective. And that really doesn't produce the kind of change that we know is needed. And so we need to move towards process consultation, which is about co-construction of the problem and empowering the consultee to make those decisions. Now, not part of Sylvia's original work was this concept of cultural humility. I don't believe it was ever written explicitly in any of the textbooks, but it is underlying and implicit in the work, but I have been much more intentional in my training, especially this year, to bring this up and to amplify the work of Tervalan and Marie Garcia, who have talked about this concept of cultural humility, which is very similar to that humble inquiry. And it's that idea that, you know, I have to also look inward, critique myself, fix power imbalances in my relationships, and develop partnerships with others that can advocate. And so this is really important in our school consultation, especially when we have a diverse consultee and client constellation, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. And finally, IC does also draw upon, especially in more recent years and writings in the Newman and Rosenfield 2019 text, they cite the work of Colette Ingram's Multicultural School Consultation model, which isn't really a problem-solving model as many of the other models are, but it's more of a framework. It's a framework for how do we think about our consultation work. And it goes beyond the scope of this talk for me to go in much depth about that. But there are three main points I want us to think about as it relates to being instructional consultations, instructional consultants, especially right now. One is really understanding our own learning as a consultant, and that's that cultural humility we just talked about. Thinking about where your consultee is in their own cultural identity development, because they're likely evolving as well. And then thinking about how does that create a variation in our consultation constellation. That's a lot of C words. We're going to unpack this in just a minute. We're going to get some time to actually practice this. And so, here are the 8 components of consultant learning that Ingram says are important. And I'm going to pull out these first 2 for us today. Understanding your own culture, and then understanding how that impacts other people. So how would me being a white woman of middle-class status, and also, I'm a mother of 4 children, 2 are white, 2 are Black, 2 experience very little hardship in their life, 2 others have had significant hardship through foster care and early trauma. So how does that shape who I am when I'm sitting with a teacher? How was that different from when I was an early consultant and I didn't have that life experience of seeing what my kids experience? It plays a role. We like to think that it doesn't and that we can be neutral, but it absolutely does. So we have to be mindful. So with that, I'm actually going to turn this over to my co-presenter, Hannah. You can take that away, Hannah. I think I might have just stolen a little bit of your role, but you can pick it up from here. I apologize.
Dr. Kaiser, this is Tina Brown. I'm sorry to interrupt. There was a question in the chat asking if you could elaborate on how the consultation models can differ from MTSS.
So MTSS is a framework, right? It's a framework for thinking about problems, right? And I like to think of MTSS originally where it came from is it came from public health. It's a public health model of like primary prevention and then tertiary prevention, or secondary and then tertiary. It's just a way of thinking about problems. So where does consultation fit? We talk about this a lot in my class. So it can be it can be at any tier, first of all, right? So if I'm a consultant, I could be consulting and doing systems level consultation, organizational consultation around tier 1, developing a new tier 1 curriculum, evaluating it, monitoring progress, for example. I could be consulting with an individual student that the teacher has tried a lot of really good tier 1 instruction with a strong curriculum, but the student's not making progress. So that could be kind of a tier 2 support. However, interestingly enough, like if you think about it, instructional consultation, if done well, even if I'm doing that with the teacher who has now requested assistance of me of a student that we would perceive as kind of needing some kind of tier 1 services or tier 2 services, I'm working with the teacher. And if the teacher is improving her own practices, being reflective, learning new assessment strategies, trying new strategies, initially, whenever she has a similar problem in the future, that's actually affecting tier 1 because it's improving instructional decision-making, improving instructional quality. And so, I would argue that even if we conceptualize consultation as, helping teachers with kids that they've identified for tier 2 or tier 3 services, that it's still a tier 1 support for the teacher. So it gets very complicated and very murky, but I think that there are lots of ways we could think about it. I also think we could think about that team model that we looked at earlier. And if a school has an MTSS model that uses a standard protocol approach, meaning we do universal screening of tier 1, If there's a big problem at the base, we change our tier 1 instruction or curriculum. If there are smaller groups of students that need help, we think about an intervention for them and they receive that intervention, but outside of the classroom, right? That would be kind of a typical standard protocol model. And if those students don't make gains, they might receive a more intensive service, but it may not have a problem-solving approach, an individual problem-solving approach. And so perhaps consultation could be layered onto that, where then the classroom teacher now receives someone to work with them to consult around why that student isn't making progress in a standard protocol approach. I don't know if that answered the question for the person asking it, but that's kind of partly my quick answer to a very complex question. Hopefully that helps.
All right, we are going to transition to a quick activity. If everybody could pull out a piece of paper and a writing instrument, or if you are tech savvy, pull up a Word doc or some other kind of graphic software where you can draw on. As you can see, we are going to do an activity titled Identity Circles. If everyone could take a moment and create that design that's in that bottom right corner. In those circles in the center, you're going to want to write your name. And then on the outside circles, you're going to want to write areas of who you are, how you define yourself, what you believe your identity self-schema is. So go ahead and take a moment to do that. I'm going to do it as well. Go ahead, take another 30 seconds or so there. All right, you guys want to wrap that up. When you look at your identity map, I want you guys to think whether or not you included race or your ethnicity within one of your circles. Consider why or why not. And if you didn't, please go ahead and add that now. You may want to take a moment, reflect on the invisible nature of culture. Who might culture be more salient for? For whom is it more invisible? How might that affect your consultation relationships? And I want you to hold on to that for a few moments, and we're going to come back to it. All right, Dr. K, next slide. Thank you. All right, so we are going to look at the second part of Ingram's Multicultural School Consultation Framework. This is all about knowing your consultee. So this is where Kaplan's theory on consultee problems comes back in. It's going to be really important to keep in mind the consultee's skill, objectivity, confidence, and knowledge. An acronym for that is SOC. I think one of Dr. K's students last year threw that out. That helps. We don't only want to keep those in mind for content and curriculum, instruction, assessment, and different kinds of interventions, but also for working with students who may differ culturally from you. For example, teachers may lack objectivity when they're working with students of a different culture by overemphasizing the student's culture. Next slide, please. All right. And that third area of Ingram's Multicultural School Consultation Framework uses this diagram. It depicts the possible cultural constellations and constellations and a consultative relationships. You're right, it's the last C words. It's catching up to me. In many cases, because our field of school psychology and teaching and overall education is predominantly white women, and that does not represent our diverse student body, we're likely going to see constellation A, where the consultant and the consultee are similar, but the client, or in other words, the student, is different. In this case, the teacher and the consultant may become blind to the ways in which their cultures are shaping the view of the student and case outcomes. However, more rare, but sometimes we could have other constellations where the consultant and the student share culture similarities and the teacher differs. This may cause the consultant to feel more protective of the student and deal with their own emotions in that scenario if the teacher is not as culturally sensitive. The teacher and student could be similar but differ from the consultant, or sometimes we see all three differ, or sometimes we see them all be the same but differ in the context of the school itself. For example, a consultant of color working with a teacher and a student of color, however, in a predominantly white school district. Any of these constellations are important to consider through a lens of cultural humility. So now, if everybody could take a quick moment for some brief self-reflection, get that piece of paper out, turn it over, grab another piece of paper, and I want you guys to take a moment to draw your own constellation. So think of a case that you have right now, or if you have multiple that come to mind, think of a more memorable case, or for our consultation students, think about the case that you're working on, or interns, think about a case that you have right now. And go ahead, you can write, constellation A, B, C, D. I know it's a little hard to see there, but go ahead and draw your constellation.
Also, while you're drawing and thinking, if you're thinking about one particular case that you've had, maybe one that's stuck with you, you can also think about this in terms of other categories of culture, right? Culture is deep and it's complex. So in some of the examples we gave here, we talked about racial culture, right? And being the same or different as your consultee or the school at large, but it could also be socioeconomic status, right? So if you and the teacher are both middle class, by definition of your jobs mainly, and the student is not, even if you all share the same race, for example, that could have a different implication. So you might even have a more complex diagram than what you see here. So feel free to take some liberties as you're drawing that out.
All right, and I think we're going to try and do some breakout rooms. Yeah, all right, fingers crossed for this.
Yes.
So we're all going to discuss our constellation, and also if you guys just want to jot down those questions, I have them written down, or just, write down some thoughts that you're having in regards to those questions. We're going to share the identity circles that we just created and our constellations, and then discuss the things that it raises for us, concerns, comments, questions, and then we'll come back in and share some key takeaways.
And we did want to just say, there's sometimes a little bit of breakout room anxiety when you're at a conference, especially when we're talking about issues of culture and race. And so we are making these small rooms of 3 people, 3 to 4. So that way you can feel safe and comfortable in a smaller setting. And then we're going to come back to these same breakout rooms throughout. So also we wanted to kind of replicate what would happen in a real session when we can actually be together and maybe get to know a school psychologist from another area. So take some time to, of course, introduce yourselves and that as well. But so yes, you'll just get a chance to talk about and just debrief what we've said so far, your identity as a consultant, and then a potential constellation that you may have in your school. Okay, here we go. Let's see if anyone's in the room and you need help joining, You can go down to your participant window at the bottom, and there should be a way to join. It should give you a prompt to join the breakout room. You have to click that prompt. I'm going to move some folks around here. Is anyone having trouble trying to put folks in the room here?
Right, just give us a moment, guys, for everybody to come back in and Dr. K to share her screen again. All right, looks like everybody's getting kicked back in. I love that everybody turned their camera on.
And just a fun reminder as everyone comes back in, you will be unmuted. So you will have to remute.
All right, I think we still have some people coming back, but we can go ahead and get started and talk about some takeaways that we had in our breakout sessions. If anyone is feeling brave and wants to unmute themselves and share. Not, I'm going to call on one of my co-presenters, Chrislyn.
I'm happy to share. I had a great group, and I had one graduate student and one other practicing psych, and one of the things that came up was this feeling that we don't want to ask teachers for one more thing this year. And that I know really resonated with me when the other person brought that up, because I've found myself in a position of feeling like consultation is sort of asking something of them, like, let's try something new. And, you know, that can be tricky since we are trying to help. But when everybody's feeling so overburdened. So that was interesting. It wasn't really super related to the identity circles or the constellations, but it was a good discussion that we had. As far as the constellations were concerned, we were talking about how there's a difference in some of the socioeconomic status of the students that we're working with versus both the teachers and the consultants.
Super. I actually got put in a breakout room with Sarah and we're in the same program together, but we got to meet Megan too. And we talked about how, one, the only reason I put my race and ethnicity down in the identity circle was because I scripted this and I knew I had to, and I was going to ask all of you to do it if you didn't. And Megan said that she knew to do it because she does a similar activity when she teaches. Is it your multicultural consultation class, you said, Megan? I think so. Yeah, I think. So she does a similar activity, but yeah, I thought that was interesting how, you know, that was the whole takeaway of that, you know, we usually don't think about that when we talk about our identity. We think about being a school psychologist or a student or a mom, and race and ethnicity, despite it being such a large part of who we are, when you are privileged, you don't necessarily consider it all the time.
And Hannah, yeah, to that point, you know, I think in one of the groups I joined, you know, it was a complete opposite conversation. And I think to that point, that's very important, right? And the magnitude and how heavy it is to be a school consultant of color, especially at this moment, right? And maybe to be working with consultees who are actively defensive against it, or who may think they're aware and awake and want to do this work, but maybe doing so in ways that, you know, might not actually be as awake as they think. And that can take a toll and be very draining and exhausting. And how do you protect yourself? And how do you look for your allies? And so that's also a big part of this conversation and important for all of us collectively, I think, as school psychologists, I felt very upset to have to close these breakout rooms because the conversations were so rich and so important. And it makes me realize like we need to have more of a network for ourselves as consultants and to talk about the work and to talk about how to support each other through the work. And it just kind of showed to me kind of like the implications and the importance of that, because I think a lot of us, and I say us because I'm sharing in this as a faculty member, but mostly for school-based practitioners, right? You can get so isolated, especially if you're in a district where there's maybe only one or two other school sites, or maybe you're the only school site for the district, right? You don't have someone else to necessarily talk about this with. And so I think the breakout rooms were really helpful and important, but too short. We keep going with this. Maybe for another session, we'll just do just this, right? So I think that's important. Did anyone else have anything to share from the breakout rooms? Oh, we even had this slide, Hannah. Sorry, I didn't put that up. All right, so where does that bring us? We got 15 minutes. We always kind of think about, how much time, what are we going to get through? We packed a lot in, and I think we probably were a little too ambitious, given the important nature of all these conversations. But, this kind of brings us to that idea that, because this work is so hard, it takes a lot of skill. It's not easy to be a consultant. And in fact, that's why a lot of school psychs probably shy away from this aspect of the role, because it's a lot easier to kind of work with a nice scripted test kit with a kid and, do the assessments and write up the report than it is to actually do this work with the other adults in the building who can be scary or frustrating. And so it takes problem solving skills. It takes instructional behavioral assessment and intervention skills. But the ones we're talking about today are the effective communication skills. And so, everything that we just talked about in our rooms, I kind of listened in on a few different things where this idea that, we have to be effective communicators. And to do that, the good news is we've all been trained in psychotherapeutic kind of helping skills, right? And so these skills up here on the screen are not new information to you. So I don't have to train you in all of these skills. The one thing that we tend to do, though, when we are ourselves frustrated or stressed or exhausted, is to try to run to like a quick solution, right? Like we don't have much time, here's the idea. And what we know is that when we offer a quick solution, the tendency for the other person is to be defensive and to resist that information, even if it's good information. So the thing for us to just remember as school consultants is we do have to try to avoid offering too much information too soon or in a way that doesn't make sure that that's the information someone truly wants. And then not to get into interview mode, right? A lot of questions from our head about what the problem is or what it could be. So these reflective questions become the basis of the work of IC. Clarifying something that's been said, maybe something that's been culturally loaded, and you're like, whoa, that's kind of a big assumption. So you just stop and ask, tell me more about that. What did you mean when you said this? And that can be just a very honest, humble inquiry about something that's just been said, getting it more specific. Paraphrasing. Sometimes just saying it back in the person's own words can be very powerful because maybe they didn't really think about what they just said, and hearing it again gives it in a new light. And then, of course, when emotions are charged and you can hear the emotion, but maybe the person's being super reasonable and not saying it, it's very important to reflect the emotion back. And, I hear you're really upset about this. You're really worried. You're very anxious about this. You're feeling helpless. Like those are the kinds of words that can be helpful for someone to hear. And so in our work, we want to stay on the top. Krislin's going to talk to us a little bit about this. Kristlin, you want to take this away?
Yeah, sure. So Newman and Rosenfield have been referenced a few times in this presentation, but they also draw on Argyris's ladder of inference. And I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, but Argyris is an organizational...
Why is the dog up here?
Psychologist who came up with this model of, this ladder of inference. So it actually came up in my breakout group that one of the people in my group said, in her time being able to do some consultation work, a lot of conversations about home life and parenting were coming up. And I thought this was a great example to tie into the ladder of inference here, because our goal is to stay low on this ladder. So some concerns may be at like the lower rung of the ladder, which is sturdy ground. So we're talking about observable and measurable data. So saying, Irene is behind in class. She missed 3 days of school this week and scored a 65 on the spelling test. We're nice and low. That's data that we're talking about. It's observable. Once we get higher up on the ladder, we're making more, it's less observable. We're making more assumptions as we get higher. So meaning we're on the shaky ground, the ladder is less stable. And we're talking more about our opinions than what facts are. So for example, I think Irene might have a learning disability instead of saying, my earlier statement related to Irene. So we can go to the next slide, Dr. K. So then we can practice looking for red flag words that are at the top of that ladder. So I'm just going to read this teacher's statement. I guess I expect some support in the area of suggestions how to make some changes in his daily behavior. He challenges me and is so impulsive consistently. It doesn't seem like things I've been able to use over the years that were quick fixes seem to work with him. And perhaps additional testing needs to be done for him for behavior or academic reasons. So what were some, you can type in the chat too, what were some red flag words that you see in this paragraph? Anybody?
I think identifying that what this teacher has used over the years isn't working with him, and not understanding that this is an individualized student that may be different, and kind of grouping all her students and that child as well together. It can make it, the child or the parent feel like that their child isn't reciprocating the interventions as they should.
Yeah, I like that. You're right. There's a grouping that's happening there. We did touch on that earlier. Or it might have been in my other session. Okay, they're all blurring together. Sorry. But I'm looking in the chat here too, people saying quick fixes. I would agree that is pretty high up that ladder. Perhaps additional testing. Yep, that could be, making some assumptions or looking at opinions instead of looking at the data. So very good. We have a great group of people here that are picking out some good examples.
I saw someone said, am I on mute? No, someone said impulsive consistently too. So yeah, impulsive. What does that even mean, right? And consistently sounds kind of all or nothing. So good. All right, here we go.
Okay, and how would you move down the ladder using communication skills? What would be a way that you could look at this statement and have a response that might make things more objective or observable rather than opinion based? If you want to type it in the chat, or you can, unmuting works too. So if you want to do that.
Yeah, what specific clarifying question or paraphrase would you ask or say at this point? Or is there a feeling you would reflect? What would you pick from this to move down the ladder?
I really like Deb Springer said she'd ask for specific daily behaviors. So asking to sort of operationalize, what do you mean by, what do those behaviors look like to you? Rachel said she would ask to operationally define impulsive. Yep, Susan, describe behaviors you see as impulsive. So just trying to work with what the teacher said to you, reflect that you're listening, and then also try to come down on that ladder in a way that's supportive of them and tries to get more at the objectivity of what's really going on. So super.
Let's just look at a couple other examples. Oops. Which of these responses would be best? Sounds like he's very impulsive and not much seems to work. Wow, that sounds challenging, right? Tell me some of the things you've tried. Have you tried a behavior chart with him? Maybe we could do a mystery motivator. Heard about them in my class. Or can you give me an example of impulsive behaviors in your classroom? You can put in the chat, which do you think would be best? B's, I don't know if you can see the chat, Chrislyn, but B's we've got a strong showing for B. Lots of folks are saying B. They're hearing
Couple E's. Yep, I see all the B's and a couple E's here and there. So yeah, I like that, and we're going to discuss sort of this strategy more in depth in a moment too. This idea of the bond and move, perception check, and clarifying. So yeah, I like that. That's the direction that people are headed in.
Yeah, you could tell this teacher is really emotional about it, very frustrated. And so it's important to recognize that with that reflection of feeling. But then also going back to the previous comments that, you know, we do need to get some clarity here and get a little bit more specific. So the combination of the B and the E are really effective.
All right. So here's a new strategy. You saw it on the previous slide. A lot of you selected that as your response to that teacher. This is an advanced strategy because it combines two different reflective skills. It should be used when the consultee is expressing emotion and perhaps venting in a way that isn't so productive. Like Kristen said, when they're high up on that ladder. Rosenfield refers to this as the bond and move strategy because we can use a reflection of feeling to bond with the teacher so they feel heard, but then pair that with a paraphrase or a clarifying question to move the conversation forward. So for example, if you want to read that one over there, the teacher, she's saying, I want to slow down and reteach him some of the concepts he missed this week's test, but I'm worried I'm leaving the rest of the class behind. They are getting bored with all the review we've been doing, so I can try to catch him up. It's just not fair to him, to them, the class. So then the consultant says, I can understand how you are nervous about them missing out. It is really complicated trying to meet him where he is while still keeping a brisk pace for the rest of your class. So she's bonding. Then she says, can you tell me more about the test you mentioned? And then she's moving forward. All right.
Okay, and then one of the things we also want to be cautious and aware of is uninvited information giving, which I think we brought up briefly earlier when we were talking about humble inquiry, Dr. Kaiser. This idea that we're diagnostic sometimes, or we tend to be these experts or be perceived as that, and that can lead to some information giving. So giving reasons why change would be good. This, telling teachers, this can really help you by, it can create reactionary responses sometimes. In cases that are emotionally charged or high stress, it can be easy to fall into the trap of giving information in response to a resistant statement. So you would really only want to give advice with permission. In the motivational interviewing, oh, here we go. Sorry, I got a little lost, guys. The strategy that we typically would use with this is called elicit, provide, elicit. So instead of just outright providing information to teachers, the idea would be to ask permission to give information. So for example, you would elicit what the teacher knows or wants to know. What would you like to know about, teaching him when he's a little ahead of the class? Or are you interested in any ideas? And then providing information once it's been requested in a manageable size that's not, let me read you the results of this latest research study, but something that's succinct and helpful. And then also elicit the reaction as to what else they want to know about what you just told them. So invited or well-timed information can be helpful depending on the way it's approached. So first, use the strategy to suggest a possible intervention strategy to this teacher. So the teacher says, the student is often asking for help and barely finishes any written work. She moved here from the Philippines in kindergarten. I know her parents still speak their language at home some, but English is still her first language, so I don't think that should affect her. I just can't figure out why she's not doing the work. I know she knows how to do it. So let's try this example together. Post what you would use for your elicit, provide, elicit in the chat. how might you use this strategy based on what this teacher is telling you in your consultation? Oh, I think I see somebody. Nope, they're all still B's and E's.
In the interest of time too, I mean, I think we're kind of getting short on the time. So, you know, this one is kind of a meatier one for us to really sink our teeth into and to think about and discuss. But, you know, this is one where, you know, we might want to resist the writing reflex. We see here very clearly that maybe this teacher doesn't fully understand the importance of language acquisition and how long it may take for students to develop language proficiency, even if you know, English is their first language, but they speak other languages in the home, they might not have a fully understand. So it might be an opportunity to talk about that, but without rather than just like jumping in to correct, but just saying, you know, it sounds like you're you know, uncertain about, you know, why she's having some of this difficulty. You're thinking about her language. You're not really sure if that would have an effect. Would you like some more information about language acquisition? And if the teacher says, yeah, then you can share some information. And then you can say, I don't know, what do you think about that? And you could share some information about how, you know, students that are multilingual or bilingual, even if it isn't their first language, how that might potentially affect classroom performance. And so that would just be a quick example. We wanted to give more time to that. But of course we are running out. There's so much good stuff to discuss here. So I do have to move us though towards the end. I want you to know that we're all available for further consultation on this. If you are interested in further training, you can of course reach out to me. We can always talk about that. And then the other thing is we have part 2 coming up next. We have all our references here, and I think the handout is in the chat room. But we have 1 minute if anyone did have any burning questions. But if you're coming back to part 2, I think what I'll do is I'll just build in a little bit more time, and I'll cut some of my overview a little shorter if you're coming in to that, so we can have a little bit more time to just ask questions that you may have had about any of what has already been presented. So I think with that, if you have questions, you can stick around and ask. And if not, okay, thank you, Rachel, for giving out the handout. Thanks, Jennifer. We appreciate all of you for attending. We hope you find that this was helpful, and we're really excited to know this many people are interested in consultation services, and we hope to collaborate with you further, and we hope to see you at part 2.